So Rohini and I just finished lunch, and we were having quite an interesting conversation about how cultural differences can create a little bit of drama in a relationship, or certainly in our case anyway. And I was actually laughing because as a child growing up in South London. And I say South London like that because there's an irony to it, because my mum, bless her heart, was actually quite a snob, and so she came from from the background that she came from was, I would say, was very much in the realm of being upper middle class, and yet when I was growing up, my parents didn't have a pot to piss in financially, and we lived right next. Our house was on the perimeter of a council estate, which in American parlance would be like a project. And so a lot of my friends were from that part of the world, from the council estate. So I think that was kind of troubling to her, because with her upper middle class sensibilities, I was always getting these sort of little social nuances rammed down my throat about how you should hold a knife and fork.
Which is what started this conversation, because of how I was holding my fork.
As being one example. And my mum's stock reply to any time that I did anything that she felt was in the vein of the type of individual that would live in a council estate, and it sounds so awful to say this, but that would be considered common. So for argument's sake, if I was to hold my... This is the correct way to hold a fork, and this is the correct way to hold a knife. But if I was to hold the fork like that, if I was to hold the knife like that and eat like that, that would be considered common.
So we were eating lunch, and I was putting food on my fork like that and eating it.
And so, and I said, "You're eating your lunch like a barbarian. That's a barbarian way to eat your lunch." And in the past, I think I would get quite triggered about that. That got so ingrained into my system. And it wasn't because it was common per se, because I had a lot of friends who would fit that mantle. I think that at one point I had a girlfriend who was probably of that inclination, shall we say. And soon after we split up, my mum said to me, she's like, when you get married, darling, you should... And she didn't necessarily say it quite like that, but... for artistic license, this is how she would speak to me. When you get married, darling, you should marry someone from your own background. That will make life so much simpler for you. It will be so much more rewarding if you have a marital partner from your own background. And so...
You promptly chose me.
So I promptly chose you, and I think because you were Canadian and you had a somewhat exotic complexion, let's say, you were somewhat of a different ilk. But I think that when we got married, we got together, and I think there were times when I think that our relationship went through trouble or whatever it went through, that got into difficulty. That thing that my mum said would suddenly come back into my thinking. So for argument's sake, when you held the fork like that, and I was not in a good...
That's the right way.
Oh, the right way. You held it like that, and I wasn't in a good mindset. I was thinking, my mum's right, I married the wrong person, she's not from my background. I'm stuck now, what am I going to do? Look how she's holding the fork. That means something. So I guess where we're going with this is, or I'm going with this, are we going with this together? But the idea is that we can get so caught up in those like ridiculous sensibilities that just all just sort of made up BS. It's just nonsense. If two people love one another, that's all that matters. And all the rest of it is just... it's nonsense.
Well, you can work that out. Like today, when you said I was eating lunch like a barbarian, I didn't take it personally. I got curious about what you meant by that.
Right. And in the past, I think I've tried to tell you in the nicest possible way that there is a different way to hold a fork. And it's either fallen on deaf ears, or it's actually, there's been a pretty, not the most pleasant of responses. So now I can actually laugh about it. I actually see the funny side. I just see it all as, the illusory quality of thinking and how we get caught up in those just sort of old habits of thinking.
How we make things up. And I know that I had this thing that you will go on and on about desserts, how I like to save the end of the dessert to last.
Oh yeah, that's crazy.
But how you hold your fork isn't crazy.
Our relationship nearly came to an end before it began, because you know how you get a triangular piece of cake, let's say, for dessert? Rohini likes to really savor it, and apparently the prime cut of that cake is the very apex, the triangle bit at the end. And I ate that first. And she was absolutely horrified. I think she was actually on the point of walking out and leaving me there and then on the spot.
That's not true.
Well.
But I don't see that as any different than how you hold your fork.
No, it isn't actually. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not at all.
We all make things up.
We do. So that's all I've got to say for today.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye.